Today we turn toward the transformation that can happen when we get involved in personal ministry. As we read the passage from Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44, listen for how the disciples responded when Jesus asked them to do something that seemed impossible, and what happened when they took a chance and stepped out in faith. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now very late. Send them away so that we may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." When they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all, and all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. Those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men. The word of God for the people of God.
So we've been exploring what Andy Stanley calls the 5 faith catalysts, those habits or experiences that God uses to grow our faith. The last 2 weeks, Pastor Jason has taught us about the first 2 of those catalysts: practical teaching, which gets us excited about the things of God and inspires us to put them into practice, and private disciplines, which increase our openness and in-tuneness to God. And today we are exploring the third catalyst, which is personal ministry. Now, when we're talking about personal ministry, we're talking about getting hands-on with our faith. It's the way we move from being hearers of the word to doers of the word, taking on those servant leadership roles as we engage with the work of God in the world. Friends, every single one of us is called into ministry. Now, for some people, ministry might look like going on mission trips or teaching a Sunday school class. For others, ministry looks like volunteering in the church office or strategizing a new community outreach project. But however it may look, personal ministry is a matter of getting in tune with the gifts that God has given you, noticing what God is calling you to, and boldly stepping out in faith to join in God's transforming work in the world. Now, the funny thing is, as much as we can all agree that the life of faith is not merely about a mental exercise, but it's meant to be lived, actually engaging in personal ministry can be terrifying. And it's terrifying because more often than not, God is leading us to serve in ways that push us out of our comfort zones, that stretch us, that make us have to think outside of the box. Have you ever felt God nudging you, even urging you to do something, but you've put on the brakes because you feel inadequate or unprepared? Even the disciples who walked with Jesus and paid attention to what he was up to, sometimes they balked when Jesus asked them to get to work. They weren't sure how people like them could really make a difference. They responded a lot like we do. Even after a full day of helping Jesus teach a crowd of people, the disciples realized that it was supper time. And so they sidle up to Jesus and say, "Hey, listen, so teacher, that was really great. We're 100% on board with everything you were talking about, but these people are starting to get hungry, so maybe we should send them away so they can go get some food, right?" Now, kudos to the disciples for paying attention and noticing that people might be hungry, but Jesus says, no, let's not send them way, how about y'all get them something to eat? Oh, you mean me? Oh, Jesus, you're so funny. Why should we feed them? How can we feed them? And that's when the excuses start piling on. But Jesus, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's like a lot of people here, like thousands of them. And even if we go and find food for them, that's going to cost a ton of money. And Jesus, I've run the numbers, that's just not in the budget. But you know, it makes me think about the difference between how Jesus calls us into personal ministry and how we tend to think about ministry when we're left to our own devices. It's tempting to spend a lot of time doing research and cost-benefit analysis and budgeting and having committee meetings and maybe a potluck or two because we're Methodists. Let's get real, we need to eat. And sure, some incredible, life-changing ministries can come out of that process. But when we focus on how we, by ourselves, can try to make something happen, we're far too likely to allow our worries to outweigh our trust that God is stirring something up. We tend to think that personal ministry means tapping into what we can already do, but in reality, personal ministry enables us to recognize that we are dependent on God. It's great when the ministries we're called to make use of the gifts and talents we already have, but more often than not, personal ministry stretches us. It forces us to take a chance and step into an unfamiliar, even overwhelming situation, so that we can look for what God is up to in, through, and around us. You know, God has a funny habit of calling the people who think that they are the least worthy or prepared or ready. I think about Moses, who, when God spoke to him through a burning bush, said, well, God, actually, I don't speak so well, but God, what if nobody listens to me? But God, I don't even know what to say. But God still was able to use him to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. I think about Jeremiah, who said, but God, I'm just a kid. No one's going to listen to me. But God used him anyway as a prophet. I think about the Apostle Paul, who's constantly talking about his weakness. But God used him to spread the gospel in a profound way. And friends, so it is with us. Maybe at first we're feeling shy or too busy or underqualified, but I think there's some truth to that cliche that God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. When we hear people share their stories about going on a mission trip or teaching Sunday school for the first time or volunteering with the youth, often they say, well, I was nervous at first. I didn't think I could do this. But the story quickly turns around to become a testimony of what an incredible experience it was. And how that person may have thought that they were blessing someone else, but actually in the course of things, they themselves were being blessed. And I have to wonder if maybe part of that blessing is the gift of relinquishing a false sense of self-sufficiency, so that we can be embraced by the God who is constantly molding us and shaping us into the kind of people we were created to be. Now, when Jesus told his disciples to feed the thousands of people who had gathered around them, their first response was a lot like ours. Us? We can't do that. We don't have anything to offer. But Jesus helps them rethink their situation and recognize that they already have available. The disciples look around and they figure, okay, well, our assets include 5 loaves of bread and, oh, we've got 2 fish. Great. Then Jesus instructs them to group the people. And then Jesus takes their resources, blesses them, and begins breaking the food into pieces to share. And the amazing thing is that everyone gets enough to eat. And there's even 12 baskets of food left over. All this from what looked like a meager supply of bread and fish. It makes me think about a quote that I shared with you several months ago from Arthur Ashe, who is a tennis champion and an activist. And he said, start where you are. Do what you can and use what you have. Serving God isn't about having everything already perfectly figured out. It's about making ourselves available. It's about making our resources available. It's about being willing to say yes, even if it means offering up our insecurities and our fears and our doubts and our worries. All the disciples had available were a couple of loaves of bread and a couple of little fish. But Jesus didn't say, "No, that won't work. Come back when you can offer a 4-course banquet." Jesus said, "That's great. I can work with this." When we have the boldness to say, "I may not know what I'm doing, but here I am, use me," God can bless our efforts and bless them abundantly. God can accomplish so much through us when we're willing to take off the brake and just let God do God's thing. But are we willing to do our part and then trust that God will do his part? Jesus was able to use even a couple of loaves of bread and some fish to do something incredible. And I bet that really changed the disciples' perspective. You see, as much as God works through us to touch the lives of other people, God can also use those experiences to transform our own faith, to make it bigger and more tangible than ever before. Friends, personal ministry, although it does help us recognize our dependence on God, it also helps us experience the power of God working through us. And that expands our understanding of who God is and how God works and who we are. You see, we're called into partnership with God. We're entrusted with this cooperative work of transforming the world around us, and that is an incredible gift. Now, we tend to think that, well, first I have to have faith and then I can go and do. But friends, sometimes it's the other way around. I think about when I'm trying to learn how to play a new board game or a new card game. I'm one of those people who has to read the instructions for herself, but then I have to actually play the game so I can figure out how it works. And in a similar way, we can discover a lot about the love and grace of God when we're in Sunday school or having conversations or fellowshipping together. But there's something special about the way we engage with God when we partner with him to do the transforming work in the world. That's why we encourage even our smallest children to help make placemats for the Kairos prison ministry, or to take time during VBS to put together manna bags to give to the homeless persons in our community, because they're learning in a tangible, hands-on way about this God who cares for every person, who cares about compassion and justice and calls us to have a part in that. We get to have a hands-on experience in making a difference in the world. Now, in many ways, personal ministry is a lot like on-the-job training. There might be a little bit of prep work involved, but mostly it's diving in and getting that practical experience right away, learning as you go. Now, when I was in college, I had the super glamorous summer job of being a cashier at the local KFC. Now, the training consisted, my first day, of about 20 minutes of uniform requirements and food safety. And then my manager told me to go and help out the customers who were gathering out front. And I looked at her like she was nuts. I hadn't memorized the combo numbers. I didn't know how to run the register yet. I had no idea what all these buttons did. And you guys know me, I like to be prepared. But finally my manager said, "Listen, just paste on a smile and figure it out." And you know what? If you get stuck, I'm going to be right here. I can help you, but just go try. And so it is with personal ministry. When you take that bold step to say yes, maybe you don't feel fully prepared at the start. But I encourage you to trust that with God's help, you are more than capable of figuring it out. And we have the gift of one another. That's part of the reason why the church exists. This is a training ground to encourage you to call forth the gifts that God has given you and to place you in positions of making a difference. We are here to support you and to resource you as you do what God is calling you to do. And so I encourage you to keep these things in mind as you consider what God might be stirring up in you. First, just notice what's going on around you. Remember that the disciples weren't called to feed the whole world in that moment. They were simply asked to feed the people around them. As you pay attention to your corner of the world, what do you see? Who needs a word of hope? What breaks your heart or causes your blood to boil? Answer those questions, and then start looking at what resources God has given you to respond to those needs. Second thing you can do is don't be afraid to try, and don't be afraid to fail. Let's be real, it stinks when something you put a lot of time and energy into just flops, and it can be a little bit embarrassing. But without risk, how can anything new be accomplished? It is far better to fail and learn something than to force a quasi-success and gain nothing. So let us dare to serve boldly and step out faithfully wherever God is leading us, even if we don't quite get it right the first time. Third, let us rejoice in success. Celebrate how God has been at work, and then look around to what God might be calling you toward next. My hope is that we will recognize when we have those baskets filled to overflowing, and that we might consider how we can use that abundance of blessing to continue proclaiming the good news of God. And fourth, I encourage you to lean on each other. Yes, personal ministry is how you yourself are getting active with your faith, but you don't have to go alone. Maybe I have some bread and you've got some fish. On its own, it's kind of blah. But together, we can feed the world. So often when we do engage in personal ministry, we think we're doing it for others. And while that's true, hindsight teaches us that we really benefit from it too. It's that hands-on, on-the-job learning, a means of putting into practice with our hands and feet the faith that we proclaim with our lips. We learn firsthand about our dependence upon God, and we experience how God's power is stirring things up in the world. And so I invite you to take some time this week to consider a couple of things. What are your loaves and fishes? What are your gifts that you have to offer? What fears or inadequacies or worries might be preventing you from saying yes to what God is calling you to do? What is one way that you can offer your gifts to serve others, even if it stretches you a little? If you're already engaged in personal ministry, whether that's singing in the praise band or helping with a food bank distribution or whatever that may be, I encourage you to keep it up and to notice how God has been at work in you to confirm your faith. And if you're not engaged in personal ministry yet, I invite you to prayerfully consider what God is calling forth out of you. Come talk to me or to Pastor Jason or to any of the leaders of the church, and we'll get you connected. Last week we had our servant ministry recruitment fair, but there are still plenty of opportunities for you to get involved. Don't be afraid to ask, and don't be afraid to say, yes, here I am, use me. Will you pray with me? Holy God, we admit that it's often easier to shy away rather than get personally involved in the work of ministry. Yet we know that you call each of us to serve in your name in ways that make a difference, big or small. So God, here we are. Send us. We offer to you whatever it is that we have to give, of our time, our talents, our energies, our skills. Take them, God, and use them in ways that bless this community. And as we serve, grant us the blessing of recognizing how much we depend on you to give us the strength to accomplish what you set before us to do. Grant that we may serve boldly, embracing your promise to lead and love us faithfully